The husband finds out that his wife's suggestion of open marriage with another couple is due to her existing affair with one member of the other couple. He then creates a scheme to expose the affair in a dramatic and public way, leading to a satisfying revelation of the truth. Edouard had always prided himself on understanding his wife, Inès, better than anyone else. They had navigated life's ups and downs together, creating a marriage that, in Edouard's eyes, was the epitome of love and mutual respect. This belief made what happened during a seemingly ordinary dinner all the more jarring. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of quiet, uneventful night they often spent enjoying each other's company after a long day. Edouard cooked dinner, one of his specialties, spaghetti carbonara, and they sat down to eat in their cozy dining room, the one with the large window overlooking their well-tended garden. As they ate, Inès seemed unusually pensive. Edouard asked if everything was all right at work, expecting to hear about the usual office politics. Instead, Inès hesitated, her fork pausing mid-air before she set it down. "Edouard, I've been thinking," she began, her voice unsteady. "How would you feel about exploring an open relationship? Specifically, with Gabriel and Teresa?" Edouard felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath him. Gabriel and Teresa were their friends, the kind they had barbecues with and celebrated holidays alongside. The suggestion was so out of left field, so contrary to everything he believed about their relationship, that for a moment, he wondered if he had misheard. An open relationship? With Gabriel and Teresa? Edouard repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. Inès nodded, looking at him earnestly. "Yes, I think it could be good for us. To explore, to experience something new together." Edouard struggled to process this. His mind raced with 1,000 questions, each more unsettling than the last. Was he not enough for her? Had she grown bored with their life together? The more he thought about it, the more a sinking feeling of betrayal nestled in his heart. He masked his turmoil with a practiced calm. "I need to think about this, Inès. It's a lot to take in." Inès reached across the table, her hand gently brushing his. "Of course, take all the time you need. I just thought it might be something exciting for us to consider." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Edouard's thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and hurt. As they cleared the table and said goodnight, a part of him felt distant, as though he were watching the scene from outside himself. That night, lying beside Inès in bed, Edouard stared at the ceiling, grappling with the revelation. He knew one thing for sure: their relationship had just entered uncharted waters, and nothing would ever be the same again. Edouard's mind was a battleground of conflicting emotions as he lay awake, the soft breathing of Inès beside him a stark contrast to the turmoil within. The morning brought no relief. The suggestion of an open relationship echoed in his thoughts, each reverberation amplifying his confusion and hurt. At work, Edouard found it impossible to focus. Images of Inès and their friends Gabriel and Teresa, laughing and enjoying each other's company, now took on a sinister hue. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he was missing, a piece of this puzzle that was eluding his grasp. Determined to find clarity, Edouard decided to start paying closer attention to Inés's behavior, to look for any sign that could help him understand. In the following days, he observed subtle changes. Her phone was now always on silent, her evenings often occupied with work emergencies that hadn't existed before. One evening, Edouard decided to follow her. It was something he never thought he would do, something that felt alien to the trust they had built over the years. But this wasn't just about him, it was about their marriage, their future. He needed answers. Edouard trailed her discreetly as she left the house, citing another late meeting. His heart pounded as he followed her car from a safe distance. The route was familiar, but not towards her office. Instead, she headed towards the part of town where Gabriel lived. Parking a block away, Edouard watched as Inès entered Gabriel's house. His hands clenched the steering wheel, the knuckles white with tension. The sight was like a physical blow, confirming his worst fears. He sat there for what felt like hours, lost in a haze of betrayal and disbelief. When Ines finally emerged, Edouard was too stunned to confront her. He watched her drive away, a part of him still hoping there was some innocent explanation. The next day, Edouard called Teresa under the pretext of planning a surprise birthday party for Ines. The conversation was strained, Edouard picking his words carefully, trying to gauge if Teresa was aware of what was happening. Her responses were guarded, her laughter a little too forced. It was clear she was unaware of the situation, and Edouard felt a pang of sympathy for her. Edouard decided he needed concrete evidence before making any accusations. He couldn't shake the image of Ines and Gabriel together, and it fueled his resolve. He started to document Ines's late nights and unexpected absences, compiling a record of her lies. As he gathered evidence, Edouard also began to reconnect with parts of his life that he had neglected. He reached out to old friends, started going to the gym again, and even took up photography, a hobby he had always been interested in but never pursued. These activities became his refuge, a way to build his strength and resolve for what was to come. Meanwhile, the dynamics at home grew increasingly strained. Conversations with Ines were superficial, and Edouard found it harder to mask his inner turmoil. Each day brought him closer to the inevitable confrontation, a moment that would redefine everything they had built together. Edouard knew the day of reckoning was coming, and he braced himself for the storm that was sure to follow. The truth, however painful, was better than living in a lie. And Edouard was determined to face it head-on. As the days turned into weeks, Edouard's initial shock gave way to a cold, calculated resolve. He had gathered enough evidence to confront Ines, but he knew a direct confrontation wouldn't suffice. Edouard wanted to expose the affair in a way that would leave no room for doubt or excuses. He wanted the truth laid bare for all to see, especially for Teresa, who was unwittingly entangled in this deceit. The plan he devised was simple yet dramatic: a dinner party. He would invite Gabriel, Teresa, and a few other close friends under the pretense of celebrating a fictitious promotion at work. It would be the perfect setting to reveal the affair, a public forum that would prevent Ines and Gabriel from twisting the narrative. In the days leading up to the dinner party, Edouard painstakingly prepared every detail. He wanted the evening to appear normal, even festive, before dropping the bombshell. He selected the menu, arranged for exquisite wine, and even practiced his speech, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. On the night of the dinner party, Edouard felt a strange sense of calm. The house was filled with laughter and chatter as the guests arrived, complementing the elegant setup. Ines was radiant, unaware of the impending storm. Gabriel and Teresa arrived together, laughing at some shared joke, their happiness a painful reminder of the betrayal. Edouard played the gracious host, ensuring everyone's glass was always full, the conversation light and engaging. As they moved to the dining room for dinner, he caught glimpses of Ines and Gabriel exchanging surreptitious glances, fueling his resolve. Throughout the dinner, Edouard carefully steered the conversation, building up to the moment he had meticulously planned. As dessert was served, a hush fell over the room, a sense of expectation hanging in the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention," Edouard began, standing at the head of the table. His voice was steady, his demeanor composed. "I invited you here tonight under the pretense of celebrating a promotion. But that was a lie. The real reason we are gathered here tonight is to bring to light a truth that has been hidden for too long." The room was silent, every pair of eyes fixed on Edouard. Ines's face had drained of color, her eyes widening in realization and fear. Gabriel's expression was one of confusion, slowly morphing into dread. Edouard continued, "For months now, my wife, Ines, and our friend, Gabriel, have been having an affair. The shock in the room was palpable, a collective gasp rising from the guests. Teresa's face crumbled, her eyes darting between Edouard, Inès, and Gabriel. As Inès and Gabriel tried to interject, Edouard silenced them with a raised hand. "I have evidence," he said, his voice unwavering. He presented the gathered proofs, timestamps, photographs, and messages that left no room for doubt. The aftermath was chaotic. Teresa, in tears, confronted Gabriel, her hurt and betrayal evident in every word. Inès tried to approach Edouard, but he was beyond listening. He had said his piece, the truth was out, and with it, the facade of their marriage crumbled. The guests left in a hurry, the evening ending in a far different tone than it had begun. Edouard sat alone at the now disheveled dining table, the weight of what he had done settling in. He had sought the truth, but at what cost? The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: there was no going back from here. In the wake of the dinner party, Edouard's home, once a haven of warmth and love, felt hollow and lifeless. The echoes of Teresa's cries and Inés's pleas from that night lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of the irreversible rupture in their relationships. In the days that followed, Edouard grappled with the consequences of his revelations. He had expected to feel a sense of justice, of vindication, but instead, he was overwhelmed by a profound sense of loss. The facade of his marriage had been shattered, and in its place lay the broken pieces of what he once believed was an unbreakable bond. Inès had moved out the day after the party, her departure marked by a silence that spoke volumes. Edouard found himself wandering through the empty rooms of their house, each corner a repository of memories they had created together. He realized then that his quest for truth was not just about exposing the affair, it was also a journey towards acknowledging the cracks in their marriage that had been widening long before the revelation. The fallout extended beyond the confines of his home. Friends who had been present at the dinner party reached out, offering support but also expressing their discomfort and shock. Edouard appreciated their concern, yet he couldn't shake off the feeling of being an outcast, a man who had aired his dirty laundry in public. Gabriel and Teresa's marriage, too, had crumbled under the weight of the truth. Teresa had always been more than just a friend to Edouard, she was a kindred spirit, and seeing her hurt pained him deeply. He reached out to her, hoping to offer some solace, but Teresa was understandably distant, engulfed in her own world of pain and betrayal. Amidst this turmoil, Edouard found an unexpected source of solace in his rediscovered passions. Photography, once a dormant interest, became his refuge, a way to express the emotions that words could not capture. He spent hours capturing the world through his lens, finding beauty in the mundane, a stark contrast to the chaos of his personal life. Edouard also began attending therapy, a step he had resisted in the past. The sessions were challenging, often emotionally draining, but they offered him a space to unpack his feelings and the complex dynamics of his marriage. It was during these sessions that Edouard began to understand the role he had played in the disintegration of his relationship with Inès. He had been so focused on her betrayal that he had ignored the distance that had been growing between them for years. The journey towards healing was slow and often painful. Edouard had moments of doubt, times when he questioned whether exposing the affair had been worth the price. But with each passing day, he found strength in his newfound self-awareness and the small joys of life he had previously overlooked. The chapter closes with Edouard organizing his photographs for an exhibition, a tangible representation of his journey. The images, each capturing a moment of clarity or beauty amidst chaos, were a testament to his resilience and his ability to find hope in the aftermath of betrayal. As Edouard looked at the photos, he realized that this was not just an end but a beginning. A start to a new chapter in his life, one where he could be true to himself and open to the possibilities that lay ahead, unencumbered by the shadows of the past. The final chapter in Edouard's journey begins several months after the tumultuous dinner party. Time had brought perspective, and with it, a sense of peace that Edouard hadn't felt in years. The initial pain and chaos had given way to a period of introspection and growth. Edouard's photography exhibition, aptly titled Fragments of Light, was a resounding success. The collection, an array of images capturing moments of beauty amidst despair, was a metaphor for his own journey. The exhibition hall was filled with friends, colleagues, and strangers, all admiring the raw emotion captured in his photographs. Edouard felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. This was his work, his vision, and it was being celebrated. Inès had reached out to Edouard after moving out, seeking closure and perhaps forgiveness. They met at a quiet cafe, a neutral ground where they could talk openly. The conversation was difficult, filled with admissions of mistakes and acknowledgments of pain caused. Edouard realized that their marriage had been eroding long before the affair, buried under unspoken resentments and unmet needs. They parted on amicable terms, with an understanding that their paths, once so intertwined, were now diverging. Teresa, too, had found her way through the pain. She and Edouard reconnected, their shared experience forming a bond of understanding and empathy. They supported each other through the healing process, finding comfort in their friendship. Teresa had started her own journey of self-discovery, exploring interests she had put aside during her marriage. Their conversations were often filled with plans for the future, a future that was uncertain but filled with potential. Edouard's relationship with his friends had evolved as well. Some friendships had withstood the strain of the events, while others had faded away. Edouard understood that this was a natural progression, a part of life's ever-changing tapestry. The friends who remained were those who appreciated his authenticity and supported his journey towards self-discovery. As Edouard walked through the exhibition hall, pausing at each photograph, he reflected on the journey that led him here. The pain of betrayal, the shock of revelation, and the subsequent fallout had been a crucible, burning away the illusions and leaving behind a clearer sense of self. He had learned to embrace his vulnerabilities, to seek joy in the simple things, and to appreciate the transient nature of life. Edouard's gaze lingered on a photograph of a sunrise over a serene lake, the light breaking through the morning mist. It was his favorite piece, symbolizing hope and new beginnings. He realized that this was not just the end of a painful chapter in his life, but the start of something new, something beautiful. As the exhibition drew to a close, Edouard felt a sense of contentment. He had come through the storm and emerged stronger, more grounded. He was ready to face whatever the future held, with an open heart and a renewed sense of purpose. The chapter concludes with Edouard locking up the exhibition hall, the last of the guests having departed. He walks into the night, the city lights shimmering around him, a man transformed by his experiences, ready to embrace the new paths that lay ahead.